Hi, everyone. This is the acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. It is Friday, April 3rd, and today we're going to do a couple of different things. First, I'm going to take a look at some of the transits that are perfecting, give you a reminder about what's happening in the sky right now. Then we're going to take a look at a natal chart along with the horary chart and how these two charts sort of changed my thinking about the coronavirus and its astrological timeline. So I think that this should make for some interesting content for today. I hope you enjoy it. Let's go ahead and start by looking at the transits of the moment and just giving a refresher of what's going on in the sky right now. So taking a look, the biggest thing happening over the weekend is that we have Jupiter and Pluto getting together in a conjunction, and that conjunction is taking place about 24 degrees of Capricorn, so Jupiter and Pluto conjoining. And then we also have Mars moving into a square with Uranus. And that square with Uranus is perfecting by the 7th. So it's about 4 days out, but it's within that 3-degree range. So you'll be feeling that over the weekend. And then at the same time, today into tomorrow, Mercury and Neptune are conjoining. Now, I've done videos on all of these separately already. So you can check out the Mercury Neptune video I did yesterday. You can check out Jupiter Pluto video that I did. I think it was last week, but that's right there in the list of recent videos. And then, Mars Uranus is the energy that I want to talk about today a little bit more in depth. For now, I'll just say, remember that the Jupiter Pluto conjunction is really a potential moment of great catharsis and breakthrough. It can represent the darker and heavier themes of Pluto being amplified, spread, enlarged by Jupiter, which can, be a little heavy. I mean, and we're seeing that in the world right now, obviously. But it can also signify rebirth, moral, spiritual, intellectual rebirth, coming to receive a broader vision or understanding of something, and just being rejuvenated by the depth and intensity of what we're seeing right now. So that's a positive with Jupiter Pluto that I'm trying to stick with in my own heart at the moment. Meanwhile, Mercury Neptune, very otherworldly, sort of transcendental, maybe a little porous and boundaryless energy coming through today into tomorrow. Again, check out the video that I did yesterday on that one. And then finally, what I want to talk about today is Mars square to Uranus. I'm probably going to do another video about this in depth. So for now, what I just want to say is watch that expressions or outbursts of anger, force, temper are, watch for them. What I should say is watch for those kinds of energies or impulses over the next couple of days. Mars Uranus can be quite explosive and combative, like an expulsion of yang energy. It can be very inventive. It can be very creative. Action orientation along with innovation, defiance, rebellion. So don't be surprised if you're feeling maybe just a little, if you're feeling a little like, if you're in a mood that wants to challenge or defy or, sort of get into it with people. It's also a great time for there to be, actions meant to free or liberate, but they could be a little impulsive or reckless as well. So you got to kind of watch this. It's like getting, the Mars Uranus energy is like getting a Ferrari or something. And it's like, okay, it looks really cool, and the impulse to want to drive it 200 miles an hour right away is there and could get you into trouble. So this energy can be very productive and swift and can get things done, and a lot of electric kind of surprising and what I want to say, an energy that you can be captivated by and that could really move through some limitations or some blockages, especially considering that Mars is separating from Saturn. So it's almost like breakthrough, right? Break the speed of sound. It has that like defy all limits to it. It has that feeling behind it, but we want to be careful that we're also not, the Mars Uranus is also known for very explosive things, accidents, car crashes. I mean, I don't mean to be ominous, but Mars Uranus is like the potential for there to be sudden and sort of cataclysmic, violent kinds of events. So you do want to watch for that over the next couple of days. The way that I see it playing out, honestly, in my own life and in my practice with people most of the time, is through interpersonal conflicts, especially where we feel the need to break free of something that we feel limited or caged in by. And we're like, I don't care what you think, I'm going to do it my own way. But then we might end up hurting someone in the process, or even hurting ourselves. Um, at the same time, like if I had to say the most productive use of this energy that I see in a very mundane, everyday way, it's going to be like saying, I got to get off the couch, got to rid myself of some form of inertia or stagnation, and kind of break out of a slump and hit it, and that motivation energy can come on really strong. Like I said, I'm going to do a full video on Mars Uranus, so I'm just sort of treating it off the cuff today, because what I really want to say today has to do with some of the timeline of the coronavirus. Now, here's one of the things that I think is really significant that I guess it didn't occur to me right away until I had someone that I worked with in my practice recently, actually one of my students, that was dealing with something that was really intense. And so it was her chart that sort of led me to this realization. All right, so first of all, I'm going to show you her natal chart, and we're just calling her student. So here is her natal chart. And one thing that has been happening for her, you can see a huge stellium of planets: Venus, the North Node, the Moon, the Sun, the Ascendant, the part of Fortune, all in her first whole sign house in the sign of Cancer. Now, Cancer in ancient astrology rules the lungs, among some other body parts, but is associated with the chest and the lungs. And she has had, as most of you know, the nodes of the moon have been in Cancer for the past couple of years now. And that means that eclipses have been falling in this first house. Now, anytime that your first house is receiving a lot of action, whether it's your ascendant ruler or planets in the first that are receiving hard aspects, especially from Saturn or even the outer planets, slow moving planets, typically squares or oppositions are going to potentially provoke a little bit of stormy weather around health. The first house is traditionally the house of health. A lot of people think it's the sixth house. The sixth house is not the house of health. In fact, it's the house of disease. The first house is the house of health. Now, so she's been, you can see this load of planets there. Well, what else has been happening in her chart recently? Well, the planet Pluto has been opposing the moon in that first house from Capricorn. It has also been starting to go into a conjunction to the sun. Meanwhile, Saturn has also been opposing both planets, right? So you have Pluto and Saturn rocking both of the luminaries in her chart in the first house, while these eclipses are coming through the first house. So in terms of forecasting, that doesn't really get much more dynamic than that. Like, anyone enters my practice and this is going on, I'm like, how's your health doing? Among a short list of other things, but that would be definitely at the top. How's your health doing? So she has been having some health problems for a while, but lack of energy and feeling depleted and so on and so forth. Some of the symptoms led her to eventually get some testing done, and they ended up doing some work on her lungs. She then had a lung, they found reason to be concerned about something on her lungs, and so she asked this horary question. What will the lung biopsy results show? So when we look at something like this, there's basically what she's asking is, they found something on one of her lungs. Remember, Cancer rules the lungs. And she wants to know if it's a tumor, if it's cancerous. And so, if it's a cancerous tumor. So at any rate, in a horary like this, here's what we do. First of all, we identify the querent and we give them the planet that rules the ascendant. Now, if you don't know what horary is, I should actually stop and give you a brief update. Horary astrology is a form of astrology that's been around for thousands of years. It is not connected to the natal chart. It is the chart of a question. So when a person asks a question, in this case, what will the lung biopsy results be? Do I have cancer, in other words? Then what we do is we cast a birth chart for the moment of that question, and the astrologer casts it from at the time that they receive and sort of understand the question, you might say, and they cast the chart from their location as the diviner or as the reader at that time. So when I received this question on March 11th at 8:06 p.m., I cast the chart. What will the lung biopsy results be? And in other words, do I have cancer of the lungs? And so then there's a method of delineating. And of course, I know her birth chart says that she has some jacked up health transits going on right now. But a lot of the times, the birth chart only gives us information about what type of karmic weather is happening in what area of life, what themes are likely to accompany it. But it doesn't necessarily say exactly what's going on, which is why it's sometimes very handy to have horary around, because horary is like a magnifying glass that can go in with very specific predictive questions. So in this case, what will the results be? The ruler of the ascendant is going to be her. She's in the 8th house, which can show that she has a concern about death, understandably, but does not mean that she's going to die. It just means, the environment that she's in right now, for example, just might be saying, oh, I'm afraid. The 8th house is a place of fear. Now, if we go to examine the lungs in the horary, we look and we see go to the house that would rule the lungs, and that's the 4th house. So the 4th house is going to be the place that we look into, in other words, to examine the lungs. And here we see a number of things. I didn't get this one right away. Actually, I needed a little bit of help with it. But here is what we see right on the cusp of the 4th house. So one of my teachers ended up helping me with this one a little bit, which was really helpful. Anyway, you see right on the cusp of the 4th house, the south node of the moon. And in ancient astrology, the south node of the moon in ancient Western astrology is considered just an ill omen. It's of the nature of Saturn, and has the connotation of decrease, loss, diminishment, hardship, etc. Diminishment in general. So that's sitting right on the entryway of the 4th house, which is the lungs. But then we also see something very troubling, which is within that house, we see Jupiter. And Jupiter is sitting right next to the ruler of the 4th house, the lungs, and is in its fall. Right. You could even say Jupiter rules the 6th house of illness and disease here. And here's Jupiter in its fall. We also see in this case, we see Jupiter in its fall, and we see Mars, which is the blade of the biopsy, the surgery, so to speak, that is coming right into a conjunction with Jupiter. What will the blade find? It will find Jupiter. And what is Jupiter in its fall in Capricorn, in the house of the lungs? It's a tumor. So in this way, we were able to get the result that to this horary, which is that indeed she did have a cancerous tumor, and that was what the test demonstrated. Now, this is really obviously a very hard time for her. I'm really encouraged by the fact that the moon is on Spica in this chart. You might have seen me do a horary somewhat recently where the moon was on Spica. It seems like an auspicious omen, considering that Spica, this fixed star Spica at 23 Libra, is a very positive omen overall. It has a very positive connotation, a guardian energy. So we send our best to my student. We've shared this in my classroom as well. Send our best to my student who is facing this now. But I thought you might find this interesting as a demonstration of predictive astrology and ancient astrology, because again, what we see in this case is that when we look very closely at the natal chart, we see that um, the moon and sun are receiving an opposition from Saturn in the classical language. In modern sense, you could even put Pluto in there. And this is in the first house of health, and these are the lungs. She was born under an eclipse. You can see that the eclipses is happening because the moon is about to conjoin the sun in Cancer, and it's just about 6-7 degrees off from the north node of the moon. And that means it was a solar eclipse in her first house. This is a very dark moon, obviously, 21 degrees, about to catch the sun. And this speaks in some ways, to the destiny path of facing cancer of the lungs. Now, apparently she's a very good chance that she could come away from this okay. So that's good news for my student. But isn't it interesting that this destined moment of lung cancer, which is in some ways described by the dark moon solar eclipse in her first house in Cancer, the sign of the lungs at birth, that it comes about when eclipses return to the sign of Cancer and Saturn is opposing her sun and moon. That's when these symptoms kind of manifest, to the point where she goes and finds out that these underlying issues she's been dealing with might be the result of cancer. And then to time it out in particular, because all I can say is like, well, it looks like health might be rough. But if she says, well, is it cancer or not? I'm like, I can see that it looks like health is rough. And between this time and this time, the fact that you've been dealing with something that they're now worried that it's cancer, that it could be cancer, none of that would be outside of the realm of possibilities, given what your birth chart says and what these transits are all about. But it's still not, it's still sometimes not that precise. This is why we have so many different techniques and tools in ancient astrology, like horary. In the horary chart, let's go back to it. She asks, how are my lungs doing? She's in the house of death, a little bit worried about that, obviously. We look to the house of the lungs. Oh, there's the south node of the moon sitting right on the cusp of the fourth house. Not a good sign. Then we have the blade, Mars, of biopsy going into conjunction with Jupiter in its fall, ruler of the sixth house of disease, in the house of the lungs, and Jupiter in Capricorn, as you've probably heard me say in a couple of videos, among other things, can mean that there are tumors or growths or malignant things that are growing. The expansiveness of Jupiter, of course, and it's being in its fall in a sign that is associated with death and decay, Saturn and Capricorn. So yes, the lungs show the tumor, and the Mars to Jupiter shows the biopsy finding the tumor in the lung. Now, to me, I'm going to say this. I'm going to dare to say this, even though I know that this, if it were me in this position, I'm sure that I would be scared, just as I know my student is scared. But I can tell you that one of the things that she was saying and reflecting upon to me and in our classroom was that there is something comforting about the fact that this is shown in a birth chart, that this is part of my destiny. Our destiny is as much the fact that we will die, the way that we die, and the way that we meet our death, and what enlightenment comes to us through death, as it is about, all of the good strokes of luck or fortune or growth or progress that we tend to place such a incredible emphasis upon. And that's a lesson for us right now as well, because and this is where my thinking on the coronavirus has shifted recently. It was due to this chart that my thinking started changing a little bit. Well, it didn't change philosophically or spiritually. I mean, right now, look at what we're dealing with in the transits at this moment, right? Right? We are dealing with that same picture of Jupiter in Capricorn, which is in some ways the ideal picture of a tumor or something malignant that's growing. And we are seeing it catch Pluto and become much more, volcanic and explosive. But psychologically, what does it mean if, none of us necessarily have a tumor? Or if, well, okay, let's talk about the healthcare workers out there right now. The healthcare workers who are on the front lines, they're in a Jupiter-Pluto situation. They're being faced with death. And the recognition of our mortality, and the fact that, oftentimes we're not living life with, say, a 500-year plan or a 1,000-year plan. We're only thinking about a 10-year plan. It means that we aren't thinking about death. We aren't thinking about the reality of death and what it means for the life of the soul. If you're into astrology, then you have to believe, I think, what ancient astrologers believed, which is that we have immortal, eternal souls, unborn and undying. And so the life of the soul beyond death, the life of the soul in death, the life of the soul in relation to death matters a great deal. Because when we privilege the soul's relation to life, we aren't living beyond life in the material form that we're in. We're only living a life that is rooted in the fear of its eventual dissolution. And even if we think, well, I love this life, it's so great, I love, I celebrate life and things like that, which we should. But even if that's our attitude, if we aren't also living with a close sense of the importance and reality of death, as well as what life means through death and beyond death, then we're not really living from the standpoint, again, of what the ancient astrologers taught us. So Jupiter Pluto can give us that incredible realization of death. It's not just a tumor. It's the growing. It's the way that we grow Jupiter through that which is impermanent, through that which dissolves. It's the way that winter opens our eyes, so to speak. And that's, of course, a lot of people are saying that. I'm not at all unique in saying this right now, but that's what, a lot of people are realizing. Even if you're stuck at home in your living room and you're not on the front lines, or you're not in an industry that has to keep on going, where you were confronted every day with something of the existential anxiety of death or disease. If you're stuck at home, you're also realizing the world has stopped. In a big way, a lot of the world has stopped. A lot of people are saying, look, the world's still going on. Don't act like nothing's happening. But for a lot of things actually have stopped. And when we sit with that really, really deeply, it is like sitting with death, because in death, everything stops and it doesn't come back. It just stops. The soul goes on, but the body, the stories, we can't take anything with us. And this is why people that go to Hades are often, they're stripped to their clothes, they're stripped to their belongings. And there's often a story of Hades, Pluto, as almost like a rapist. I don't want to get too graphic here, but there is a way in which that part of us that remains naive or ignorant or in denial is in some ways ruthlessly stripped of something of its reality, and it can feel like a violation. And Pluto is like that too, where we can feel deeply violated. And this, however, this violation, in some ways, of course, there are real examples in the world where people are violated and it's not at all a good thing, right? But there are the Plutonian form of violation, the psychological violation of Pluto. It is an inevitable violation that we all face, because eventually death will come, and no one gets out of here alive, as they say. And with that, for many people, it feels quite violating. But it is also awakening. There is something, the thing that seizes us delivers us. The fear and the sudden stripping away of everything that we thought we had or that was real, that can stop just like that and turn ice cold and dead. That is also the refreshing waters of regeneration. That there's a baptism by ice in Hades, and in fact, you'll see sometimes people online. I had a student of mine who takes people into these cold tubs. I don't know if you've seen these before, but anyway, I was always thinking of Pluto because a lot of people think of Pluto as fire, but Pluto is also related to ice, and Hades has regions of ice as well as fire. So at any rate, but if you've ever had like someone, my daughter the other day took an ice pack and just like jammed it on her sister's face. And it was funny. It was like for a second, her sister didn't react. And then all of a sudden, her eyes got big and she was like, and I was just thinking like, my daughter has Mercury Pluto contact in her chart, and she's just funny. She's a trickster, and she loves kind of shocking people. So I think she could be a comedian or something someday. But anyway, Pluto is like that, where Pluto will sort of shock us and strip from us, sometimes quite forcibly, some something that we thought was real or true or solid or enduring or everlasting, and it just says, nope, it isn't. Sorry, you feel violated by that, but that's the truth. And then there's then we, if we can accept that, which is difficult because Pluto is traumatizing. Pluto can be traumatizing. But if we have some ability to accept that as a form of mercy, as a form of grace, then it's true that there is a deep form of regeneration available to us. Okay, now that's a bit of the way in which my student was reflecting upon this. Anyway, it led me to thinking a lot about the lungs. And as it's going around, many people know this, that the lungs in Chinese medicine in particular related to grief. And of course, Cancer as a sign has a lot to do with emotions and memory. And I would say that Cancer is one of the one of the signs that's more closely related to grief, actually, for a variety of reasons that I won't go into so deep right now. But um, so one of the things that I was thinking about is that one kind of hopeful thing on the horizon right now is that if we just take this clock forward a little bit, the nodes of the moon are about to change signs. And even though Pluto, Jupiter, Saturn have quite a dance between now and the end of the year, which has made me very uncertain about the timeline of the coronavirus, one thing that really catches my eye is that when we get to late May, the nodes of the moon are going to change signs. And that means that the major tributaries of karma taking place through the eclipses are going to change dramatically. Late May into early June, they switch into Gemini and Sagittarius. The other reason, so the reason that this is hopeful is that the tributaries of karma are starting to shift directions, as though the winds are shifting on the sea, and they're no longer flowing through the sign that is intimately related to the lungs and the grief. And that, along with the fact, this is late May, early June, along with the fact that if we go backward just a little bit into May, there's a couple of other things that are happening that's I find really, really interesting. So first of all, the first thing that's happening is by April 25th into the 26th, Pluto turns retrograde. So Pluto's retrogradation, is a slow ordeal. And I find that interesting, though, because following suit right away, when you get into May, then Jupiter and Saturn are going to turn retrograde as well. By the 15th of the month, all of those planets are retrograde. Retrogrades mean reversals. On the simplest level, reversals of all different kinds, but retrogrades often signify reversals or a turn of the tide, a shift in momentum. I think it's very interesting. By the middle of May, all three of the planets most intimately connected with this pandemic are retrograding, and that then by the end of the month and early June, the nodes of the moon are changing signs, and the north node in the sign of Cancer, sign of the lungs, is shifting, and that will no longer be emphasized as much. So the south node moving out of Capricorn and the same sign as Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter in its fall also seems really significant to me. So this just had me wondering, and it was prompted by my student's chart and seeing the lungs. And I said, I wonder if your lung issues may start to get a little bit better due to this same timeline. She's going to have a surgery pretty soon here to remove the tumor, and it's very hopeful that that will be it. But that is coming up, and then we have all three of these planets turning retrograde. And we have the eclipses leaving her first house. And it had made me thought maybe your issue with the lungs will be over. And then I thought, my God, that what if that means in general that the hardship collectively that's seen through the symbolism of the lungs and cancer will be changing directions? What to speak of, again, the same planetary retrogrades. So I don't know. Who knows? I could be completely wrong about that, but it was a hopeful thought. And I know that it's in line with some of what I've heard people on the news saying about late May or early June. And I wondered, I don't know where they're basing that evidence on, or where that's coming from. But it made me think, it does sync up with some interesting shifts astrologically, the retrogrades first. Of course, the problem is that these retrogrades with Saturn and Jupiter go back over Pluto. Jupiter goes back over Pluto by retrograde and then back over Pluto forward by the end of the year. Saturn gets by retrograde back to within about 3 degrees of Pluto and then turns direct. All of that still by the end of the year. So it could be, again, that there are a few waves of this that happen. But I was really encouraged by this. In the meantime, I also, as you guys all know, am in the process of promoting my upcoming courses. Surprisingly, there's been a lot of people enrolling for the courses. More people than I've ever had, in fact, which I was completely shocked, because I guess people are worried, people worry about the future. And so in some ways, I've heard other astrologers who are like my seniors in the industry say that when there are recessions, um, sometimes astrologers are still in business because people are more concerned about the future. So, just in a selfish way, I was like, well, maybe that is good for me, like, because I work for myself, obviously, like maybe that means that business will still be okay, because I know, like myself, like everyone is like, where's the money gonna, like, where's money coming from, or whatever. Um, anyway, so I've been readings have slowed down for me a bit. So book a reading if you want one for maybe the right now I'm scheduling into September. But the wait time is slowing down because people are booking readings less. But my classes are actually filling up more quickly than they ever have. And I think that might be because people are stuck at home and like might really want to enjoy studying a course in astrology. But at any rate, uh, the kind of astrology that I just showed you, that's Hellenistic astrology. That's ancient, old school karmic science. It's a lot more nuts and bolts. It's much more structured and organized. It's good for people who know something about astrology but are looking to really kind of develop a stronger base and more organization and effectiveness when it comes to specific predictions. It's also very good for people who have some existing knowledge, who are looking to just really get a lot better when it comes to understanding the classical roots, the classical philosophy, spiritually speaking, and different forms of prediction, for a first year and a second year course, and the horary course that I offer as well. And you can see also, if you're a total beginner, it's also a great course, because you're really starting from the ground up in my year one course, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. But the other thing is that what's really cool is, with ancient astrology, is that you can still have so many wonderful psychological conversations with people about their character, their behavior, their work in the world, etc., their destiny, what they're here to learn. A lot of stuff that modern astrology has become really, really good at. But what ancient astrology gives you as well is like, yeah, it's a tumor, or you're going to get sick this year. Not fun stuff, but good stuff too. Like, I just got a horary back from someone today that said, indeed, I got the job that you predicted I would get, even though it's coronavirus season, in the world right now. Sometimes, there's really good things that come through that we're predicting for people all the time as well. But ancient astrology is much more of the predictive science. And when you marry that to sensitive counseling for people, you really have best of both worlds. That's why I call the class Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. Anyway, it's filling up. It starts in June. I think it's the 14th of June. It meets on Sundays, 12 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern. You don't have to be there live. You can watch the whole class remotely, because it's all archived, or you can be there live for the webinars. There's 30 plus lessons on the year, 2 to 3 hours each, plus 12 guest lecturers, tons of bonus material and homework. That's all optional. A certification track you can go on if you want to be certified through my school. Um, lots of cool stuff. Plus, we have live guests come in and I show you how to read for people. We break down those sessions together. So it's pretty fun. It's a great time to learn. Who knows how long we're all going to be stuck at home? Hopefully not long. If you're being adversely affected by coronavirus, you want to take the course. We have a need-based tuition program. I've been using it for 10 years, but it's wide open to people right now. Normally, I have people who are on disability, who are unemployed, who are single parents, who are, veterans or maybe fixed income as a retiree or something like that. But I've opened it wide up to people who are out of work or who have a very limited budget, who don't know when they're going to get back to work, or who are on pause for a couple of months. I'm happy to work things out for people who want to take the course. So feel free to reach out, info@nightlightastrology.com. I hope that you enjoyed this example and gave you some good things to think about. Don't forget that my Bhakti Yoga page is now up on my website. If you go to nightlightastrology.com, you can check out a whole private YouTube channel that I have just exploring the content of Bhakti Yoga. I'm doing a series right now on what's called the Sri Ishupanishad, which is a beautiful ancient text. So if you like the spiritual side of the way that I teach and present astrology, you'll really love this channel. I hope you check it out. All right. I hope you guys have a great weekend and stay tuned for more soon.